Okay.
Anyways, we're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Well, aloha, everybody. Thanks for being here again. And so this first part, we want to just kind of talk about how did you guys connect to this place? What brought you here? What kept you here? And maybe just share your name and affiliation and share the story. Hiroshi?
Yeah, I'm Hiroshi Kato, and I started teaching at Windward Community College when it first started in, I don't know, 1971, 72 or so. And shortly thereafter, I went into administration. But prior to that, I was teaching in the biological sciences. And this pond here was owned by Kaneohe Ranch. And Kaneohe Ranch had a very good employee, Henry Wong, who bought the pond. And so Henry Wong bought the Waikalua Loko fish pond, and he had a problem. So he went to Windward to see if we could somehow help solve the problem. The problem he had was something that you wouldn't think about. You know, there were too many ulua and papiu and stuff like that in the pond. Okay? And these are predators, whereas in a fish pond you want mullet. And so you want to somehow raise the mullet, but keep the predators out, the ulua, papiu, and the barracuda. So he came up to us with that problem, and so we started a directed research group, a group of students, and I forgot what they call it, fish pond maintenance or something or another. And so we presented this problem to the students, and they came up with a solution. And that's how we started in the fish pond, trying to get rid of the predators, but still keeping the mullet. And so their solution was to enclose an area to keep the predators out, so only the mullet can live. And so they started off on that end toward the wall. And they thought it'd be easier because they could only put one line here, one fencing, and they could keep the predators out and keep only the mullet there. But then the problem that came up was that poachers would come over the wall at night, they'd throw net. So they decided to get some fencing from this side going straight out 300 feet, 100 feet across, and 300 feet back. So 300 by 300 by 100 foot, all the way back in here. And so putting in the fencing, then the fencing would be free of predators, catch the puama from outside, bring it in, and stock with right inside the fencing. Okay, but that's easier said than done. There are a lot of different challenges, and this was student-oriented. And Mark, there were about 8 students involved in this directed research project, and Mark Reed was the one that was sort of the student leader, and he wrote up a real nice report. Every student had to write his own report, and I remember the one that he wrote. That was very good. But part of the problem was, okay, first of all, getting the fencing in there. So we ordered some fencing that was about half-inch square. And this came from the mainland. It was vinyl coated. And there were a lot of,
Sorry, yeah. I'm just going to get in here. You're getting a lot of wind chops.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just going to get a little screen on here. You guys can keep on talking, though.
Yeah.
Sorry
Anyway,
about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, there were a lot of mangroves out there. So the mangroves were perfect because mangroves are very strong, water resistant. And they went out there and they cut mangroves about 10 feet long, each one about 10 feet long. They figured out how many they would need for the posts of the fencing. And the next project was cutting the mangroves, getting it all in line, and how do you pound it in? You have to figure out what kind of soil you had beneath the water. So, and they figured it out, the topography of the pond itself, what it was made of, how deep the sediment went down, what was below that, And so figuring all of that, and they had a real nice device where they had a big solid pipe that was closed off on the top with 2 handles.
Hey.
And they would go out on a little boat and there's just boom, 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 and drive it in about 5 feet down. And then they would put the fencing. The fencing they thought was great because the weight of the fence itself would go right in the mud. But the topography was not straight. So
Yeah.
they had to take care of that. And they took care of the fencing real nicely. But the next challenge was to get the puama, the small ama. So we got boats from Coconut Island, one assault boat from Coconut Island which had a live well, and they could bring the boat right around here with the puama and then bring it across here. But then they have to look for different places where can you best find the puama. And so after looking around throughout the bay, from the marine base all the way on up to Lilipuna, they found a place, and the best place was right out here. So they made it very nice, and they had a big, huge nehu net, collected all the puama, brought it here, and by buckets, they would figure out how many puama in one bucket. They would get a line going from there, running over and releasing the puama in the fenced area. Okay, and the other thing they found out was, even before they put the puama in, that this place was loaded with seaweed. And unfortunately, the seaweed that was there was Acanthophora, an introduced species.
Right.
And so they got rid of all the seaweeds, and they, what's the best way to do it? That's another problem which they solved. And within 2 weeks, it would be right back again. And the good news is that I don't see too much of that now.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't see that. And the other thing that wasn't thought of too was that, and this is really learning by doing, the fencing was like this, but in no time it would be covered with limu.
Oh.
So they would have to clean the limu off, because if they did not clean the limu off, then 2 things would happen. You wouldn't have the circulation of the water, and also as the tides moved in, it would move the fencing down. So that was another problem. And they were successful enough. They got some real good puama in and started the project. But in doing so, they learned a couple of things. One is that, from the old days, people have been doing this, stocking the ponds over and over, and with no problem at all. But one thing that they did not count on was that the puama out there are not necessarily ama. Okay, there's an introduced species. Okay, the summer mullet, and sometimes called kanda, or used to be called kilon engeli. And the summer mullet gets only to be about this big, maybe 6-8 inches long. And so you don't want to stock that kind of mullet in the pond.
Yeah.
So that's something else that they learned. And it was a real hands-on project, and they learned a lot by solving different problems as they came up. And these are just a few of the problems. And the other one they had too was, after they got it all figured out, nothing could go in or out. The good news is we have big Samoan crabs in there. The bad news is the Samoan crabs would go underneath, burrow underneath, and then the mullets could either go out or the predators could come back in. And so that was the start, how I started here. But
And this was in the 70s, yeah? 71, you said? 72?
no, I started at college in 1971, 72, but this was in 1976, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, and then after that, they wrote up a real nice paper, and in the paper they had written what they did, how much time it took, in man hours, very, very specific information that can be useful later on.
Yeah.
How they caught the mullet, where they caught the mullet, how they started, and
Great.
they also did a survey going around to see what is in the pond. And they found out that there were about 4 or 5 different species of crabs, which is expected, and about 15 different species of fish in the pond. And I'm sure there's more, but they listed the ones that they physically saw in the pond.
Great, great. Floyd?
Well, did they do mapping of the pond as well?
Yeah, they did. On the mapping of the pond, they show the topography. And,
They do.
And they check the salinity in different places of the
Do we
pond.
have a copy of that report?
Not that I know of. Hopefully we should try to find
Let's try to find
if
it.
you still
Yeah.
got a copy of
Is
that.
that a MOP project? Do you know?
It was a MOP project.
It
I believe.
was.
We
Yeah,
might
yeah.
You think
have that.
Yeah, check on that.
item.
Yeah,
Ah.
And the one that brought it up was Mark Reed.
Okay.
Okay, he had salinity readings. He had about 4 or 5 stations, I think, maybe 6, and he took salinity readings, dissolved oxygen,
Really?
temperature, and the bathymetry of the pond. Very nice work.
Gary was part of it then.
Carrie?
Stice? Gary Stice?
No, Gary was not. He was involved in getting the pond to us in the sense that I think his neighbor of one of his rentals was Henry Wong, and so that was the connection.
that's the
Okay, yeah,
connection.
that was the connection.
So this is like 20 years before the formal restoration in 1995 started.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even
That's-
before
that's
that.
good
Yeah.
insight.
I have some data from him that predates when we really got started too.
So how did you get connected to the pond, Floyd?
I got connected to the pond because it was just about this time of year, gray day, clouds everywhere, kind of chilly. I got a call from my dean, who was Hiroshi, Professor Hiroshi Kato. He calls me into his office and says, Floyd, I have something I think you'll be interested in. A meeting that evening about the fish pond. And it's going to be this guy called Herb Lee, who, I'd never heard of, but lives in Kaneohe, who's calling the meeting. I meet up with Hiroshi. It's getting dark. The cloud's getting worse. We walk down to the golf course. It's abandoned. Here's this big building, abandoned, okay, gone broke. But Herb got keys, and we went inside, and there were some other community people. We sat in the abandoned restaurant, and in the booths. You're just thinking, this is spooky. Everything's dark. The lights were on, and we're sitting at this table. And I'm wondering, in the restaurant, abandoned restaurant, and I'm wondering, is my finger going to stick through the table? No, it didn't. And I'm figuring with my feet, I wonder who's under there with my feet. Good creepy crawlies or something. But anyhow, Herb gets up and Herb gives this really nice talk about this fish pond and how he has vision for it. It was beautiful. It was great. Now, it captured me because I'm from here. I'm a Hilo boy. And I grew up in Keaukaha with fish ponds. They were everywhere. They were mainly abandoned because of 1946 tsunami wrecked them. But I knew about them, and I said, that's fantastic. This is an outdoor laboratory waiting for us. And that was Hiroshi's idea. And then bang, came thunder. Then came lightning, and the lights went out inside this abandoned restaurant. You remember that? And I was thinking, what's going to come out of all the walls around here now? What's going to come crawling over my feet under these tables? You remember, Herb? Yeah. I think you had a flashlight, so you kept going, and then the lights came on again. And that was the start of it. And from that, came the whole Fish Pond Society. From that came
enlightenment.
It was
The lightning.
the lightning. No, it was power by then. And so from that came, I think, the richest resource not only Windward Community College had for education, but I think the University of Hawaii had. This is way before He'ia was even thinking about being renovated, before Kamehameha schools even did anything up there. I mean, He'ia then was a disaster. And here was this pond. So we developed a course in fish ponds. That was partially instigated by, remember Pinky?
Thompson.
Thomas.
Thompson.
Thompson, yeah. What year was that?
Oh, I don't know, 100 years ago?
I think 200. But anyhow, well after that, Pinky Thompson, Nainoa's father, came. And again, Hiroshi invited me and one of our other faculty members, Joe Ciotti, Professor Joe Ciotti, to come down and listen to him. I think it was Pinky, or was it Nainoa?
What's that?
That gave us that first suggestion.
Oh, probably Nainoa.
It was Nainoa. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what Joe says. All right, Nainoa Thompson says, I got an idea. How about developing a college curriculum around voyaging? Bingo. Voyaging, will relate it to ecology, will relate it to island ecology, and what's critical in an island ecology for people who live there? Fish pond, that's your best source of protein. So the two merged. So Polynesian Voyaging class got started along with this pond. This pond was our laboratory for the oceanography and the marine biology. It was wonderful. And there the story starts, and it hasn't stopped. Except we now, with Fishpond Society, own this piece of property. When Herb first brought us down here, oh man, what a mess. Oh, mangrove out there, coconut, California grass all over the place. Over there was a huge pile, remember, a concrete busted up aquaculture pens from the oyster aquaculture attempt, which failed. And so what they did is they broke up all the pens and piled them up over there. And I'm thinking, in my lifetime, this place is a disaster. And now look, it's clear, it's wonderful. There's no more mangrove over there. And it has become the richest resource, I think, not only for the college, Windward Community College, but for the whole university, in terms of science, in terms of ethnology, in terms of Hawaiiana, everything. Now this appeals to me because, like I said, I grew up with all this, and it was fantastic to apply through education everything that I kind of grew up with. I had been taught by Kupuna, and here it is. Thanks, Herb.
Thanks, Floyd. Dave, what brought you to Waikalua Loko?
Aloha. Well, my name's Dave Krupp, and I'm currently interim dean at Windward Community College. Been in that position for a little over 2.5 years. But I actually started at Windward Community College as an instructor in marine and biological sciences, and was involved in teaching general biology classes, marine biology classes, and all of those kinds of things. There's sort of a lineage here because it starts with Hiroshi and kind of passing on this idea about fish ponds and our campus being involved with the fish pond to Floyd. And then Floyd was on the board of directors for the Waikalua Loko Fish Pond Preservation Society and had been on it for a couple of years. But he was taking off for sabbatical and going to Greece for a year and needed somebody to sit in for him on the board. So he invited me in, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. That's pretty neat. Okay, pretty cool. But what, light bulb went off in my head about, the different ways in which, the college could collaborate in the interest of education, science education in particular. And I'd been part of the Polynesian Voyaging program sort of off to the side at Windward Community College. But I loved the idea of taking, and merging a class that talked about science, STEM concepts and ideas, and merging it with Hawaiian knowledge, Hawaiian traditional knowledge, and culture. And for me, what was great about that was, this is a way of really pulling students, into the sciences and getting them excited of the science. It's just kind of sneak them in. If they're interested in fishing, getting in the water and those kinds of things, and outdoor sort of stuff, you kind of trick them, and then they see the connection between that environment and the science part, and they get excited, right? And they go off and decide, oh well, science, which originally may not have been an area that they were considering getting into, that now, oh, this is something I like and want to get into. So, and then, I wanted to do more in terms of integrating Hawaiian knowledge with STEM. And so I created at Windward a class called the Ahupua. And what resonated to me about that class was this idea of how Ahupua seemed to sort of mirror watersheds. Not exactly, because they're also political, partitions or areas. But this idea of people living and working within the Ahupua and having to draw their resources from that and having to do that sustainably. And along the way, Floyd and I put together a program called the Pacific Center for Environmental Studies, and Ahupua was the central theme of that, kind of as a model for sustainability. Yeah. And I started getting kind of passionate. I was involved with the university's sustainability initiatives, and thinking about how we need to do more in these islands to help ourselves, rather than bringing things in on ships, and airplanes, and because that uses lots of oil, and we needed to do more for ourselves, and especially things like grow food, and the Fishpond, of course, was a big part of the Ahupua class. I figured I wasn't qualified to teach it, so I talked to Clyde Tamaru, who was also on the Fishpond board at the time, and said, because I knew he had been involved with other curriculum efforts surrounding the Fishpond, I said, how would you like to teach this class? And he jumped in and started doing it. Actually joined up with a counselor at Windward Community College. His name is Winston Kong. And the class just blossomed. They brought in lots of guest lecturers for various things and topics. And actually, the class is now, it's exploding, actually. It's there's people are asking us to do it in early college at some of the local high schools now. And it's part of the college's what we call Hawaii Loa program. And we have a couple of certificates for which that's a central class for. The other class, and I have to correct Floyd a little bit.
Not again.
Yes, again. So the Fishpond class, the formal Fishpond class, because you're probably thinking about the oceanographic techniques class, using the Fishpond for laboratory field
That's
activities.
called science.
Yeah.
We do that.
So I also created the Fishpond class at Windward Community College that we call Aqua 201, the Hawaiian Fishpond, plus the companion lab class. And that was a little slower to take off for one reason or another. I taught it once, but I felt I needed to find people that were more experts in the discipline. And it kind of went up and down a little bit. We did some cool things, like I asked Hal here to show the students how to do archaeological survey work, right? And one of the things we tried to do, and I think we found it, I don't know if we actually did, we were looking for the awai that connected from Kava Stream to the back of the Fishpond. And so Hal helped the students learn how we dug a little trench and all of that sort of stuff. And I think we found some rocks that looked like they could have been a wall to the awai. So I don't know if you pursued that ever since then, but it'd be nice to know if that turned out to be that. But in any case, and then Uncle Fred showed the students how to throw net and stuff like that, and things like that. It was really kind of a cool experience for me to try to teach that. But what was interesting is we now have someone who was both a student in Clyde Tamaru's and Winston's class for the Ahupua, and then when Leonard Young was brought in to teach the Fishpond class, she took the Fishpond class from him. Okay, she went on to get her, I think, master's degree in NREM at UH Manoa, and now she actually works for PAF, Pacific American Foundation, and we have her teaching both the Ahupua class and the Fishpond class. Her name is Hinano Rey, and it's just, for me, it's wonderful to see, what happens with our students. They get involved and excited, and then they take it further, right?
Yep.
And then the Fishpond has been this laboratory for a lot of our classes, and so as Floyd had mentioned, but also it served as a site for a lot of projects by our students, both from the Marine Option Program as well as the Pacific Center for Environmental Studies. And one notable student was actually a community college faculty member from Minnesota who had read about Windward Community College's GIS classes, and he wanted to learn how to do GIS. So for his sabbatical, he came to Hawaii, took some classes at Windward Community College, and learned GIS from Toshi at the time. But also he wanted to get his Marine Option Program certificate. and so his project involved essentially documenting a GIS of some of the restoration work that had happened at the pond, but he was also interested in pond circulation. And so working with Floyd, they put together some floats that they mounted small GPS units on. Okay, and the floats sat far enough down in the water that they wouldn't be blown about by the wind so much, although there was still a little issue with the wind. And he would, put these little floats in the water with the GPS on to track the path of the float and get some idea about current flow patterns within the fish pond. And so we've also had our Pacific Center for Environmental Studies students in the summertime, which are high school students, and we've had this 6-week program. In the last 2 weeks of the program, the students are supposed to do these projects, the research project. They have to, in 2 weeks, define a research question and figure out a way to answer the hypotheses they might have about those questions, and actually implement a research project on that. And a lot of those projects involve the fish pond. For one, it's a great learning lab, both for marine biology and oceanographic kinds of things. So we had students doing things like, doing plankton identification and abundance inside the pond and outside the pond in relationship to tidal flux and so on one of those, because the question is you could tow a plankton net behind a boat, right?
Right.
How are we going to do that in the fish pond? So we got a radio controlled boat and did it had a little bit of a power problem with pulling the net behind it. We had these small nets, but and in the end we resorted to actually kayaking and towing the nets through there. In those days, the invasive lemur was a problem as well. It was so thick in some places that the plankton net would get caught up in it. And it's a different species. Okay. So instead of Acanthophora, which some people call spiny seaweed, and I used to call spiny ogo.
Yeah.
The main invasive one was something called gorilla ogo or
Gracilaria. Yeah.
Salicornia, and
Yeah.
both of them were pretty common
Mhm.
and dominant in the fish pond, and I'm amazed that we're no longer.
Yeah.
Because I get bugged, we would hunt at a community work day, which is one of the things about the pond I really love, or community work days, because it brought people here, right? And you got this sense of community and stuff. But the big pile of seaweed on the side of the pond, and you go, wow, we cleared out a lot of seaweed, right? 2 weeks later,
Right back.
it's back.
All back again.
And so one of my projects was with a student was, we need to try to figure out, why that seaweed just takes off the way it is in the fish pond and stuff. And the first step of that was, well, how do we map the seaweed? And so this is sort of the early days of drones.
Yeah.
We got a drone and did aerial imaging of the fish pond, and you could see, where the extent of the seaweed was.
Right.
But that project didn't get quite completed, but it was a cool one. And then all of a sudden, the seaweed seemed to go away, so it was no longer an issue.
Global climate change.
Yeah. But we had students also do projects like with the nutrient, quantifying nutrients, and looking at it over like a couple of 24-hour cycles, and correlating it with the way that which the water flushes in and out of the pond. And what I didn't realize until I came here at the fish pond, and you walk on the wall and you go by the Oʻahu, and when the tide is rising, the water level in the fish pond is lower than it is outside. And there's this tremendous current that sometimes comes through the Oʻahu as the tide is rising. And then what happens is the tide rises, eventually reaches the peak, the water starts to come up here, and then the tide starts to drop and water goes out. Okay? And you have this reversed current going through. And realizing how great that is in terms of circulation and aeration and movement of nutrients, in the water in the fish pond. And there has to be something about that is the key to understanding fish pond productivity. Okay, and we had some of our high school students kind of try to tackle that and address that. And then the other thing, I had asked the students, because watching this water go through and out is like, can't we use that somehow, some way? And so one summer, a couple of the students put together a project where they tried, and they sort of half succeeded, but it was they only had 2 weeks to put this together. They built a little generator, okay, and so they put it in the Oʻahu, and it would spin like a little paddle wheel kind of system, and they were actually able to show that it generated electricity. And I know you're doing more with that now, right? So much more sophisticated than what these high school students did. But those are some of the crazy things and some of the cool things, about the fish pond. And a lot of those students went on to do really cool things, okay? And not always in environmental science or in the sciences necessarily. I know two ladies, they were sisters, that actually went into engineering and wound up working for Boeing on the mainland, right? And what I would get back from them is, our participation in that PACES program taught us a lot of cool things that, even though we're not doing environmental science work, the skills we learned we're applying to what we're doing now. And one of those big skills was actually writing up a scientific report.
Yeah.
So yeah, so some very cool things
Great.
as a result of that participation. I've talked way too long. I'm sorry.
No, hey, this is,
So we're going to go to Hal right now and talk a little bit about what connected. Now, you're not from WCC,
No.
and which is and it's great that we have a great partner because WCC has been a fabulous. I feel like we're a family now. And all of the students that we've been able to connect. But Hal, you've been a great part of that, as a result of Cultural Surveys Hawaii. And so I can't remember exactly sure how we got connected. What do you recall?
well, there was a person whose name I'm trying to remember who was a member of the Kiwanis or the
Rotary?
Rotary.
Rotary,
Yes.
the Rotary Club?
Okay, and I'm trying to remember his name, but he was the connection. I knew him, he knew you. He got this brilliant idea to, reconnect us, and I think that's how it got started.
Is that Chuck?
Was that Chuck Eeks?
Chuck Eeks, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chuck Eeks, he was the insurance
Yeah,
guy
right.
for
Yes,
Kaneohe.
insurance. He sold insurance.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the guy.
Leave it to the insurance guys.
And
So-
he was on the Waikalua Loko Fishpond Preservation
That's
Society
right.
as well.
That's right. Yeah, and I remember that first day when we got together in that dark, which Floyd described very well. We're all scared, and I was just starting the work on Kaho'olawe, and I warned Herb that I was going to be gone a lot. I mean, it was a busy week on Maui, flying to Kaho'olawe every day, but I kept up with it. And one of the things I think remember the most and made the most impression on so many people are the work days, of course. We all gathered around a circle. Many schools invited. Herb's genius for collaboration with many, many organizations. The schools, the high schools, the colleges, Windward Community College, of course, but Kamehameha schools, many, many other schools coming. And these kids, many, you grow up in Hawaii, you think, kids, a lot of outdoor activity, sports, everything. Many of these kids had never gotten dirty. And until you get dirty, you haven't really lived. And I saw these kids jumping in this water and focusing on gathering the limu and pulling up the mangrove. And then all of a sudden, these perfectly cleansed women and men looking at themselves and saying, "Oh my heavens, look at me. I've never been dirty before." And they got to love it. And I also remember it was one of the work days which, incessantly brought families together. Families who were, having problems, sometimes separations, sometimes the kids were away a lot. They'd all come together, and for the first time working together, pulling limu or pulling mangrove, they really began to communicate, and you could see it when they were eating their dinner together or their snack together. And it was also, I remember that time that Hawaiian Electric came. And Hawaiian Electric, they weren't going to be outdone by anybody. They showed up early. They were here before anybody else. They had all the machinery, access to all this machinery, backhoes, chippers, everything. And they had like at least 10 people here. They all worked really, really hard all day long. Not only that, they brought lunch for everybody. And at the end of it all, they made a contribution, a financial contribution to the pond.
Yeah.
And that to me was totally inspiring and totally indicative of the magic that has been created by Herb and by this visibility and the connection to this this pond. I also remember there was a house here
Yeah.
that was stood halfway
Yeah.
In the
out
water.
into the
Yeah.
water. And we walk out into that house, and it was just like you watch your feet and you wonder how soon you're going to get wet, fall through the floor. And that's when we had our first kuka sessions about the pond. I also remember we did some ground penetrating radar, trying to figure out how the stream entered the pond, where the actual entry point was. I think that was indecisive.
No, we found them.
We found it.
Where?
Yeah, one is, I think,
one here.
right about through here,
Oh, this
hooking-
one.
hooking to Kaneohe Stream.
But there was one back there.
Back there, we found that one. And that's where you guys did the archaeological work.
Well, we did the trenching and
Yeah.
found it. Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes. But the GPR, I think, was a little bit.
I think the data was pretty good.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I think the data was-
Didn't you find like a remnant of an old wall back there that
Yes,
there was.
possibly could have been a
Possibly, yeah.
filtration? Maybe like a kalo thing. We don't know, but
Well, I
Well-
think there was some pahaku back there that was
Yeah.
on
Yeah,
alignment.
there was a suggestion. Yeah, we need,
Suggestion,
but this is just set the stage for doing archaeology in this pond. You know, let's excavate these things. They're right there. I mean,
Yeah.
just under our feet over here. Let's just dig. And over there, yes, I can tell you exactly where that alwai was.
I also remember this insane project, the sewer line.
Oh, the sewer
Okay.
line.
yeah.
That was,
Oh, God.
it was going to leave this place.
Uh-huh.
It was going to go,
Under
the bay.
through the bay. Yeah.
it was going to climb up the hill by the H3, and that was going to be one of their pump stations. And they were going to take all the junk and they were going to take it somewhere. And
To Aikahi, the new
Aikahi,
Aikahi
yeah.
And-
sewage treatment plant.
yeah, it was the craziest thing I ever heard of. And
Yeah.
fortunately, that was abandoned, and that would have had a major impact on this pond.
So,
But
so you know that the pipe, you know, that they're proposing to go
Yeah.
there, they were going to do a technique for drilling underneath Kaneohe Bay.
right,
Yeah.
And you pull the new pipe through
That's
the
right.
tunnel that's created
Yeah.
for the pipe. For I guess it was supposed to be a
That's-
40-inch main, right? and it was the longest. It would have been a world record for that particular
right,
technology.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was like,
Yes.
no way.
But the technology was well established that they were going to
Yeah.
use.
But it's
But
I mean, that's how they did the sewer line going down Kāleio Avenue.
Kāleio, uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's all done, you know, underground drilling.
You just bore through and you drag the pipe with you.
Right.
But to do it in the bay
Yeah.
was a
That's where it had never been done before.
potential disaster.
Yeah.
And I'm
You-
so glad
Beneath
that
the water.
got abandoned. I think the Herb's influence had some.
Well,
part
we
of it.
were all.
Well-
There's a lot of people from the community that
Yeah.
were on that
Yeah.
committee,
Yeah.
and you know they really wanted to go under the bay, and we all said no way.
Nah.
And I think you know the consequences that they've gone through the mountain, and that was way better.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in on the early meetings, community meetings, and they were presenting that idea of putting the pipe through here, right?
Yep.
And then there was a sort of side thing that they said, oh, but there's this alternative, you know, that this large diameter tunnel to go under the mountains over
Yeah.
here, directly to Aikahi. And the more I looked at that, the more I realized that seemed to be the preferred. I mean, it was a natural reservoir for, you know, because the problem was if we had a big rain event, right?
Right.
The system couldn't keep up with the flow, and they would have to discharge
Right.
into the bay. But this was a huge reservoir that could hold a lot of that water under those circumstances, right?
Yep.
And it also led to the suggestion that the city and county didn't any longer need the pre-treatment
Right,
facility
Right.
right,
over there.
over here.
And
Yeah,
that might be purposed differently.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
So I have another question. So we kind of covered, not only how you guys got connected, but the impact that the pond over the last 25, 26 years has had on students and things like that.
Can I mention one thing?
Sure, go ahead.
With
Floyd.
the students. Let me bring in that one of the members of the board, the Waikalua Loko Fishpond Preservation Society, was a high school teacher up here at Castle, Sheila Cyboron. She was teaching a class of students that were completely failing, they were bored out of their minds, get me out of here kind of thing. She brought them down here. They took ownership. These students came down and said, "You mean my ancestors did this? You mean my ancestors understood how this works?" And it gave them a meaning. It made their lives significant. And this is when we first realized, really realized, the significance that's embedded in the fish pond. I mean, we were bringing college students down, doing labs like Dave mentioned. I had them down here doing oceanographic work, currents, all kinds of things, bathymetry, how, the pond depths changing, flushing rate, all this kind of stuff. But these students took ownership and it changed their lives. They went back to Castle, they took interest in what their education. That is the significance of this pond as an educational facility. It teaches kids, local kids, what has happened here before, how their ancestors lived and survived. It's an educational masterpiece.
So that's one additional thing in that regards, and that is because they do service at the fish pond, right? And they learn about the value of service and kuleana. What is beautiful is for a lot of these students, whether they're Windward students from Castle High School, is subsequent to their first introduction to the fish pond. I'd come to a community work day, and these students showed up, right? On their own. They didn't have to be coerced or dragged in or given extra credit. They were here because they love this idea of giving back, right?
That's right. And we made them team leaders too.
Yeah.
On
So,
work day.
Yeah. So there's so much value to the fish pond, all these different levels, So it's really great.
I remember the first day Sheila came down with her students. They were confused and rebellious, and there was lots of hanaino going on between the boys and the girls. And by the second or third hour, these kids were transformed. They were totally focused on what they were doing. It was quite amazing, and it was the place that did it to them, and the experience of this. And as you said, Floyd, that, hey, my ancestors built this thing. And you imagine this is one fish pond of how many fish ponds across the state. If you look at the aerial view of Molokai, the south coast of Molokai, it's just one fish pond after another, the entire coast. I mean, you realize that the sustainability of ancient Hawaii was based on fish ponds.
It's the same here, fish pond here, fish pond there. There's one small one over there and another one over there that's not a boat harbor. And along here were dozens of fish ponds. And then, in our lifetime, y'all got filled in like Wailupi Circle on the other side for rich homes or wedding chapels or, they just were abandoned. And we need that protein source in the future.
Hiroshi, what do you think about the future?
What
and
the
pond?
future?
Yeah, what the pond can do for helping our community and our students in the future.
I think they said it all. Where somehow, if they get a connection to the pond, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
It's not just a lab, but here, the funny thing is, just like us here, this connection, you can feel it. You can feel the mana, of the place. how come we got together today? You know, I knew him from Rotary many years back. Hal from Aikido many years back. And Dave, zoology department at Manoa. And with Floyd, not a direct connection, but indirectly through the commonality through Gary. You know, I've been at Manua Island in Samoa. And he was there, the same place too, and you know, somehow we all got together. You know, is it coincidence? Maybe not. Yeah.
Maybe not. Remember, you instigated a lot of this by bringing me into it really early, and that was with your tie with her at Rotary, and then we just tie. We just all hooked together. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, the connection somehow. You know, just.
So I remember, you know, when you were on sabbatical working in Dr. Kamamoto's lab, and Dr. Kamamoto knew I knew something a little bit about, you know, generating antibodies and using antibodies for quantifying, you know, low-level concentrations of things, and he was particularly interested in quantifying levels of a particular hormone. But Clyde Tamaru was working in his lab at that same time, right? And Clyde and I worked together on that project. So these connections.
These connections are amazing. Yeah, I forgot Clyde was there too.
Yeah.
Long before I was a graduate student, long before I was at Windward Community College. So.
And I thought it was interesting that Clyde did this work on Oʻahu, different species of Oʻahu, and that was way back when.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And it's all come back here.
So we've had, you know, I mean, there's so many highlights in my mind over the last 26 years. So this version of what we're doing right now is an opportunity for us to talk and present a message to the generations to come. What message would you like to send in the future about connecting to places like this? And how that can help them in their journey to be the next generation of stewards of Hawaii. Whether you're Hawaiian or not, you know, we have a kuleana, right? So what would be that message?
The message is an emotional tie to the setting. The setting itself speaks to the past and it speaks to the future. And we've got to train students to accept that and understand it and preserve it.
And if you know something that needs to be done, and if you don't do it, don't blame anybody else. And you're a good example. You saw what needs to be done.
You're the example.
You know, you did it.
And learn by doing. I heard you say that too. Makahana kahike.
Yeah, exactly.
Dave? Or Hal?
Oh, well, also I'm thinking of the value of place names. And it's, you know, very neglected subject. But if you look in the historical resources, every place, even small places, small landmarks had a place name in ancient Hawaii. And many of these are recorded in the, you know, in the historical records and the Hawaiian newspapers. These are slowly coming out, but if you ask these young people, look at where you live, find out the place names, find out what the place names mean, and then you will know what happened there. That's a start.
Don't forget also, we got climate change approaching. I mean, if things keep going the way they're going, this is all going to be underwater in 100 years. And so where is the best place to study it like sea level rising right here. When you build that new building, I'd like to put in a tide station up there so we can start to monitor here in the quiet water how the ocean is rising and how fast is it rising. Environmental issues like plastics in the ocean, here's a place to study it. Here's a place that's quiet. I mean, it's an ideal study location. And once we bring students in to say, oh my God, it's really happening, we got them. They will take care of things. That's the significance here
Yeah.
too.
And what you were saying now, Cal, about place is so important. Where and you do it in your in the voyaging classes that went around looking at the Waipana. And one of the places right down here, it's called Kaneohe Beach Park. But there's a lot more significance than that. And this was brought out in the initial voyaging class
we used
that
to
you
do
had.
kava ceremonies.
Yeah,
down there,
right.
remember?
It started with the kava ceremony right there, because of the historical significance of that place. And also a sense of place is so important, especially in Hawaii, because with the sense of place, you're connected. You go to the mainland, you meet somebody from Hawaii. Where are you from? Oh, Kaneohe, yeah. What grad you? And, somehow there's a connection.
Yeah.
And it comes back to where you're from.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's very important. Yeah.
Dave?
So, yeah, you were talking about message and future and things like that. And this, I've already kind of said this, but, one of the things that's very important for me is how we manage to live on these islands, these volcanic rocks that are so isolated from everywhere else, and how we're so used to bringing everything in ourselves. But the Hawaiians didn't do that, right? They had to grow it all and produce it all. And Hallett mentioned, the local ia on Molokai, and this is a symbol for sustainability, right? And it was done in a way. It's not like modern aquaculture. You go to Indonesia, where the idea is we're just going to try and grow as much as we can, and that means throwing in a bunch of nutrients into the water to get the highest productivity you can get. And then what do? You just discharge that water out into the ocean, and the environmental impacts of that, are not good. Okay, lots of problems on it. But the way in which Hawaiian fish ponds were used it wasn't intensive aquaculture, right? It was far less impactful on the surrounding environment. You got to keep in mind, water comes into the pond from outside. If you're putting nutrients in here and everything else, that water also goes back out, right?
Right.
And impacts the coastal waters that are out here. But this idea of learning from the past to do more for ourselves in these islands, I think, is important.
Also, I would add that, traditionally the fish pond, you have to look at the fish pond in the context of the landscape, because we have lo'i everywhere, particularly in Kaneohe. I mean, ancient lo'i everywhere. Kaneohe was a very, very rich area for kalo. And that water from the kalo went into the pond. The nutrients helped feed the fish, but it was also a cleansing device for the ocean.
Yeah.
So there was a whole interaction there in the water flow, and all the energy and all the substances that were cleansed by the pond itself and the fish.
Yeah, and I don't think that's been adequately studied either. But the other aspect is, this place has been here for what, 700 years, right?
400.
Huh?
400.
400. For 400 years, this has been here. We think it's happened here over the last 400 years. There's been tsunami coming in. There have been hurricanes, storms, floods. Where is that record? Out there. In the sediments of that pond, right there. You go dig down, and here's a tsunami layer. There's from the flood, here and there, and there. It's all layered out there like a book, the pages of a book. And we need to study that. I'm ready.
And Floyd, I would add to that, and Herb and I have had this discussion. Okay, we cored the pond. Unfortunately, I cannot find the results, but I make this promise right now that we will do it again.
Let's do it again. Right.
And
but we also have the small pond over there that's filled. And that's been filled in the last 100 years. So there's a 100-year story of every flood that came from Mauka down this side and flooded and buried the pond. It's now full of mud. Let's poke down, let's dig it out, and let's see all the layers and see what the rates have been for the erosion of the Mauka areas.
So
It's
this
all there.
is a great retirement project for you.
And
Wait a minute. Hey, wait. That means I got to go out there and get muddy and dirty.
Yeah.
We can all do it together. That'll be fun.
yeah, we'll do it
That would be
together.
fun, yeah.
But the similarity here is Kauai Nui.
Yeah,
Because
Kauai
we
Nui.
cored Kauai Nui,
Big time.
we could reconstruct
Yep.
the history of that marsh all the way back to when it was a bay of
Yep.
the ocean. Of
And this is the
Kaneohe
guy
Bay.
that's done it. I mean,
Wow.
yep.
And it can be done here.
Wow.
Absolutely.
will
It can be
be.
done here. It can be done at Heia. It can be done at every fish pond around the islands. Critical information of the environment of the past. Right there.
Okay. Any last thoughts that you want to share for this segment of the Waikalua Oral History Project in 2021?
No, just a continuation of what Hal said, about this pond a few years back. The water coming in was cleansed, filtered by the loi.
By the Loi, yeah.
Now we don't have the loi. So what's coming in now,
Yeah,
if it's coming in.
right.
Yeah. But I think there's some water coming in underground because of the salinity. The salinity is still lower here than out in the ocean. So there must be a source of fresh water coming in.
I've done work out here trying to find if there's springs.
Yeah, there's gotta be.
They gotta be, but I haven't
Yeah.
found them yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Are we good?
We're good.
Okay.
Wow.